In 2012, in the city of Anchorage, Alaska, the FBI conducted an interrogation with a deeply unsettling man responsible for a series of violent crimes. The agents in the room listened intently as the individual calmly revealed that, since the age of 14, he'd become aware that he viewed certain behaviors as normal behaviors clearly unacceptable to everyone around him. As he continued, he explained that, at that young age, he began to isolate himself from others, fully understanding that his thoughts were not aligned with societal norms. From that moment forward, he chose to keep his decisions hidden, treating each one as something private and potentially dangerous. Over 40 hours of intense interrogation followed, led by Agent Joan Golden and Officer Jeff Bell of the Jungle Rage Police Department. Despite lacking formal training in psychology, even these seasoned investigators began to notice unmistakable signs of a possible personality disorder. Meanwhile, the press anxiously awaited new details. Captivated by this man who now commanded as much public fascination as the infamous serial killer Robert Hansen would gain notoriety back in the 1980s, authorities had already conducted a thorough study of the man's life. They knew many details about his past, but they wanted to hear everything directly from the criminal's own mouth. Shockingly, every word he shared during the interrogation matched the FBI's findings. His confessions aligned perfectly with the facts the agents already possessed. Among all the chilling questions posed during the interrogation, none was more terrifying than the one about his motive for murder. The man confessed that he killed purely for the personal thrill of taking a life. The federal agent listening could barely believe what he was hearing. He never imagined that the man sitting across from him, identified as Israel Keyes, could possess as much knowledge about serial killers as he himself did, despite being a trained expert. While the investigator had studied such criminals in order to prevent future tragedies, Keyes had immersed himself in the same world with the sole purpose of refining his techniques. To inflict maximum suffering on innocent victims, the investigators already understood they were dealing with a deeply disturbed individual, but they had not grasped the depth of evil he embodied. Allow me to introduce myself. I'm Brian Eminfer, and welcome to another episode here on the Ossos Perthethos channel. Today, we delve into the disturbing story of a confessed serial killer and psychopath, whose revelations shocked even seasoned law enforcement agents enabled to hide their horror in the face of such brutally honest and cruel declarations. In December 2012, the FBI released chilling surveillance footage, capturing the exact moment a young barista was kidnapped from a small cafe in Alaska. Her name was Samantha Koenig, just 18 years old. 12 days after her disappearance, Samantha's boyfriend received a photograph of her tied up, accompanied by a ransom note demanding $30,000 from her family. The note included detailed instructions on where the money should be delivered. In the surveillance footage, the abductor is seen calmly walking up to the modest coffee stand and ordering a traditional American coffee. But within seconds, he draws a weapon and forces the employee to comply. Though the camera captured no sound, Samantha's body language made it clear she was skeptical for a brief moment before turning off the cafe lights. All signs indicated that the man had just announced a robbery, at the positioning of his arm strongly suggested he was pointing the weapon directly at her, which explained Samantha's immediate obedience. The cafe was located in a highly trafficked area, nestled between a gym and a busy road, making it even more shocking that no one noticed the crime in progress. The abductor's demeanor was striking, eerily calm, confident, and methodical, as if he had done this many times before. During the abduction, the man ordered Samantha to switch off the cafe lights. Next to the light switch was an emergency button, but tragically, she didn't manage to press it in time. Inside the small coffee stand, he quickly grew impatient. According to later witness accounts and police analysis, climbed over the counter and restrained the young woman, binding her wrists tightly. Police officials confirmed that during the kidnapping, Israel Keyes told Samantha he would let her live. However, Detective Monique Dahl from the Anchorage Homicide Unit firmly stated that Keyes always intended to kill her. After securing his victim, Israel removed the battery from Samantha's phone, preventing any chance of tracking before leading her away. Inside the vehicle, The FBI revealed that the criminal subjected Samantha Koenig to a twisted game of cat and mouse in the parking lot, as if it were some macabre version of Tagby for finally throwing her to the ground. What few people knew was that Israel Keyes had already parked his white pickup truck across the street in the Home Depot parking lot. He waited there for nearly 10 minutes, carefully observing the area. Only after determining that the survivors were relatively safe did he calmly cross the street and approach Samantha. The execution of the crime was so precise that Keyes even waited for all nearby pedestrians to clear out before placing the young woman into his vehicle. Even when Samantha, though bound, attempted to escape, Israel caught up to her with ease. He forced her down into the snow and, through chilling threats, compelled her to get into the truck. His cold, calculated demeanor was so disturbing that even the most seasoned investigators were shaken at one point. The killer pointed his weapon directly at the young woman and warned her not to do anything that might make him end her life. This kind of manipulative behavior is common among serial killers. In both direct and subtle ways, such individuals create an environment where the victim begins to believe they triggered the violence and emotional tactic the killer uses to justify the murder to themselves. This psychological manipulation often unfolds right before or during the violent act itself. As the investigation progressed, the white pickup used by Israel Keyes appeared twice on a long list of more than 750 registered trucks in the area. However, authorities initially dismissed his vehicle because it didn't perfectly match the appearance of the truck captured on surveillance footage. Regardless, after his arrest in March 2012, officials revealed that Keyes had traveled extensively across the United States, moving from city to city in search of new victims, but these travels were anything but spontaneous. For each trip, Israel Keyes meticulously researched his destinations, bought tickets months in advance, and prepared what he called murder kits. These kits hid in buckets buried underground contained weapons, ropes, chemicals, and various tools for kidnapping, killing, and disposing of bodies. Authorities eventually uncovered these kits in places like New York, Vermont, and even Alaska, offering concrete proof of the extreme level of planning involved in each of his crimes. In his own words, this method allowed him the freedom of choice and complete control over the timing of each murder. In the case of Samantha Koenig, she was a completely random victim. The sole reason for choosing her was that the coffee stand where she worked stayed open later than most establishments. To fund his cross-country hunting trips, Keyes often robbed small banks in remote towns, an efficient way to finance his movements while maintaining a low profile. Before he began unraveling the complex web of his criminal operations, the killer expressed discomfort with the growing attention from the press. Israel didn't want his name widely broadcast across the media. According to Anchorage Police Chief Mark Mew, Keyes was extremely sensitive about his reputation, a contradiction for someone with such a horrifying record. As a result, law enforcement kept every detail of the case under strict secrecy to ensure his continued cooperation during the interrogations. Throughout the interviews, the killer shared astonishingly detailed accounts of most of his operations. According to Agent Jolin Golden, who was present for the majority of the sessions, Israel Keyes displayed an extraordinary level of meticulousness. He would become visibly annoyed by even minor interruptions. Across more than 40 hours of interrogation, Keyes revealed an almost total command over every aspect of his crimes describing. With chilling accuracy, each hidden weapon, each route taken, and even the exact banks he had robbed to finance his criminal travels. Investigators increasingly believed that much of what Israel Keyes confessed was true, especially since his claims consistently aligned with real evidence discovered at the exact locations he described, from the selection of weapon stash sites to the burial grounds of his victims. Everything was meticulously planned. At first, authorities doubted that Keyes could be linked to so many murders. But as the interrogations progressed, the true scale of his violence began to unfold, becoming more terrifying with each new revelation. Whenever fresh information emerged, FBI field agents would immediately travel to the locations. Keyes mentioned to verify the accuracy of his statements. He directed investigators to numerous points on the map from northern Anchorage to the Blakes Falls Reservoir in New York State. At several of these locations, authorities discovered firearms that, according to the FBI, may have been used in still unsolved crimes. Even when speaking about murder, Keyes maintained a disturbing blend of coldness and sarcasm. With morbid humor, he remarked that some of his victims had even been misclassified by authorities as accidental deaths. He claimed that most of the people he killed had been buried in remote areas, isolated campgrounds, or cemeteries far from urban centers. FBI spokesperson Eric Gonzalez publicly stated that there was no evidence to suggest the suspect had lied in his confessions. At the time, the FBI submitted Israel Keyes' DNA to a national database used by multiple U.S. law enforcement agencies in hopes of linking him to other unsolved crimes. Unfortunately, the results did not yield significant breakthroughs. Strangely, Keyes did not follow a consistent victim profile. Unlike many serial killers, he showed no predictable patterns, which made the investigation far more difficult. Keyes frequently traveled across the country and reportedly admired Ted Bundy, another serial murderer known for his structured and methodical modus operandi. But there was a key difference. While Ted Bundy often targeted college-aged women with center-parted hair, Israel Keyes adhered to no pattern at all. In fact, victim selection seemed driven purely by opportunity, complete absence of recurring traits that made it nearly impossible to draw connections between the murders. Despite this randomness, Keyes did exhibit one deeply disturbing trait. In common with Bundy, a twisted sense of ownership over the people he murdered. After hours of intense interrogation, Israel Keyes suddenly went completely silent for nearly 2 months. The reason? News of his identity had been leaked to the media. The public exposure enraged him, causing him to halt all cooperation with investigators. It wasn't until mid-July 2012 that he resumed providing meaningful information, finally beginning to fill in the remaining pieces of his bloody and complex puzzle. Israel Keyes was born on January 7, 1978, in Richmond, Utah. He was the son of Heidi and John Jeffrey Keyes, the second of 10 siblings. All of the Keyes children were homeschooled and raised according to the tenets of the Mormon faith. But in 1983, Israel's father left Mormonism, and shortly afterward, the family moved to Colville, a remote area in Stevens County, Washington. During this transitional phase, the Keyes family not only severed ties with the Mormon Church but also rejected all forms of conventional medicine. Heidi, the mother, believed in natural remedies and treated everything from broken bones to bronchitis using herbs, essential oils, and peppermint baths. No pharmaceutical drugs were permitted, nor were visits to doctors. This extreme lifestyle left a lasting mark on Israel's childhood. He grew up in an environment where pain was ignored and science was distrusted. The family's home was a crude off-grid cabin without electricity or running water. Amid such isolation, the Keyes family began attending the Ark Church, a radical Christian sect that espoused white supremacist ideology. It was within this environment that the Keyes family formed ties with a young man named Jeff Cara, connection that, in time, would prove to be just as unsettling. Late in 1996, a young man would be convicted for a triple homicide, a turning point that echoed within Israel Keyes' past. Israel Keyes had developed an especially close relationship with brothers Chevy and Chain, who, like him, were homeschooled and trained in the use of firearms from a very early age. The Kehoe family, to which the brothers belonged openly, promoted the idea of an impending racial war, a belief system that had a profound influence on Israel. This direct exposure to heavily armed extremists sparked a growing obsession with weapons, one that quickly crossed the boundary of mere curiosity and became pathological. Over time, Israel began obsessively studying gun magazines such as Guns and Ammo, trying to teach himself the mechanics of various firearms fine without ever physically possessing them, while living in Colville. Israel's family also attended services at the Christian Israel Covenant Church, a religious group that preached British Israelism, a doctrine asserting Anglo-Saxon supremacy. According to this extremist belief, racial mixing was to be fought, and Anglo-Saxon peoples were destined to dominate all other inferior races. To make matters worse, Israel and his siblings often had to hunt wild animals to help feed the family. They also chopped wood and worked on neighboring farms as a means of survival. Even at a young age, Israel displayed sadistic tendencies. As he himself would later describe, he enjoyed hunting anything with a heartbeat. With time, his pleasure in inducing fear and chaos only grew stronger. On one occasion, Israel took his younger sister deep into the woods. There they used pellet guns to shoot out the windows of nearby homes. Afterward, they broke into the houses, rearranged furniture, and hid silently, just to watch the homeowners' reactions when they returned. This was how Israel found entertainment, when his sister began sharing these experiences with others. Israel abruptly cut off all contact with her and started acting entirely alone. In one particularly disturbing incident, he skinned a deer alive in front of fellow church members. As a result, he became a social pariah, shunned by the entire religious community. The term ostracism originates from ancient Greece, around the 5th century BCE, when citizens seen as threats to public freedom were exiled for extended periods. Similarly, the youth from Israel's church circle simply ceased all interaction with him, cutting off every social tie. During adolescence, his behavior grew increasingly alarming. He began setting fires in wooded areas and breaking into nearby homes, stealing firearms. Eventually, Israel's parents discovered a stash of weapons hidden on their property. One of the few friends he had at the time completely severed ties after witnessing Israel shoot a defenseless animal for no reason. By age 14, Israel had started selling stolen weapons to neighboring adults. Around this same period, his parents began hosting family friends at their home. On one visit, the child of one such guest witnessed a deeply traumatizing scene. Israel had tied a cat to a tree and was shooting it with a .22 caliber revolver. The child was left severely shaken after watching the cat's brutal execution as time went on. The local children in the neighborhood didn't just avoid Israel, they became afraid of him. Some even ran away when they saw him approaching. These reactions fed into the rapid development of antisocial personality traits, which began manifesting in obvious and dangerous ways. Israel's mother, a devout follower of natural remedies and radical beliefs, watched as her son withdrew further into his dark, isolated world, a world that would soon spiral into violent obsession and calculated horror. During later interrogations conducted by the FBI, Israel Keyes admitted that between 2001 and 2007, he had murdered at least 4 people in the state of Washington. Investigators also connected to unsolved murders of teenage girls that occurred between 1996 and 1998 in the city of Colville. The nature of those crimes closely aligned with Israel's behavioral profile during his youth, raising suspicions that he had started killing far earlier than originally believed in his own testimony. Israel confessed that while serving in the military, he had attempted to sexually assault 2 women, one in Egypt and another in Israel, although he claimed not to have completed either assault. The confessions added to a disturbing pattern. As the interviews progressed, FBI agents became increasingly convinced that between 2001 and 2007, Israel had operated methodically, targeting random victims in remote areas, particularly campgrounds. He revealed that his preferred method of killing was strangulation. When asked why, the killer calmly explained that he derived pleasure from watching his victims lose consciousness as they desperately struggled to stay alive. Amid his confessions, he emphasized that he had never killed children or the parents of children. His justification? A twisted desire not to disappoint his own daughter, Elle, should she ever learn of his crimes. Still, FBI investigators remained skeptical. According to internal agency documents, there is strong suspicion that Israel had, in fact, killed multiple vulnerable children and teenagers, particularly those living on the streets. In the years leading up to his arrest in 2012, this chilling suspicion has led many to regard Israel Keyes as one of the most depraved criminals in Alaska's recent history. Working with local police in Juneau Ridge, the FBI began re-examining cold cases that may involve Israel's direct participation. Among the most notable discoveries was a series of murders that took place in 2007 in Boca Raton, Florida, that year. 3 separate incidents were reported in which mothers and their children were kidnapped from a shopping center in the region. In 2 of those cases, both the mothers and their children were found dead inside vehicles, all shot to death. In the 3rd case, however, the mother and child were found alive and unharmed. In total, 6 separate cases captured the attention of federal authorities. In every instance, the suspect was described as wearing a mask and dark sunglasses during the attacks. One of the surviving victims, who managed to get a glimpse of the attacker's face, described him as tall, athletic, with long hair, a physical description that matched Israel Keyes almost exactly. Further, investigators noted striking similarities between the Boca Raton attacks and Israel's known behavior. The abductor reportedly carried a specific kit that included plastic zip ties, duct tape, dark sunglasses, and a firearm, the exact tools confirmed to have been used by Israel. In other cases, another detail that stood out was the assailant's ability to avoid surveillance cameras. Israel was known to have deep knowledge of ATM systems, often forcing victims to make multiple withdrawals until they hit the machine's daily limit. One of the most brutal crimes linked to him involved Nassi Boussetti and her 7-year-old daughter, Joey. Both were found bound and shot to death inside an SUV. The scene bore an eerie resemblance to the testimony of a surviving victim identified only as Jenny D. She had been kidnapped months earlier, then later released. Although no physical evidence was recovered from her case, a composite sketch created from Jenny's description showed an uncanny resemblance to Israel, particularly around the mouth. However, Israel Keyes never confessed to the Boca Raton murders, and no concrete physical evidence has been found to directly link him to the crimes. Among his confirmed statements during the FBI interrogations, Israel admitted to committing a murder in New York in late 2012, but due to a lack of details, authorities were unable to identify or locate the supposed victim. Still, investigators deemed the confession plausible, especially considering that Israel owned a large piece of land with a cabin in the town of Constable, New York, an isolated and quiet place that fit his known patterns. Also located in that same state, records indicated that Israel Keyes had taken part in bank robberies in both New York and Texas. However, the only confirmed case of this nature was the robbery of a community bank branch in the town of Tupper Lake, New York, in April 2009. Coincidentally, later that same month, Deborah Feldman was officially reported missing in New Jersey. Authorities strongly suspect that Israel Keyes was responsible for her disappearance. During FBI interrogations, Shrell admitted to burying Deborah's body near Lake Tupper, yet he refused to disclose the exact location of the remains, riding the momentum of his confessions. Shrell also admitted to the brutal murders of Bill and Lorraine Carrier, a couple who lived in Essex, Vermont, according to Israel's account. On the night of June 8, 2011, he broke into the Courier's home, tied them up, and transported them to an abandoned farmhouse in a rural area. At that isolated location, he shot Bill and then sexually assaulted and murdered Lorraine. Despite the detailed confession, bodies of Bill and Lorraine Carrier were never found. Israel once again refused to provide details about where he had disposed of the bodies. During interrogations, he coldly described the horrifying events of that night. He explained how he had entered the home silently, using a headlamp, and executed a plan he had prepared in advance. After tying the couple to their bed, he ransacked the house in search of drugs, jewelry, and cash. He then forced the Couriers into their family vehicle, fabricating a story that it was a kidnapping for ransom, a cruel act of psychological torture that formed part of his ritualistic method. On the way to the abandoned property, Lorraine attempted to resist, raged. By their lack of the fear he craved, Israel brutally overpowered her. The absence of visible terror in his victims was something that deeply frustrated him. Terror, for Israel, was the key element of his violent fantasy. What made the crime even more calculated was the fact that 2 years earlier, Israel had buried one of his so-called murder kits near the Courier's home. On the night of the attack, he returned to retrieve the pre-hidden materials and used them to carry out the murders. Afterward, he reburied the kit, this time in a location near Parrishville, New York. Remarkably, this hidden cache was later found by authorities following his arrest. In total, 2 of these hidden kits were recovered, both containing liquid substances believed to have been intended to accelerate decomposition of human remains. At the time of his arrest, the only confirmed victim of Israel Keyes was 18-year-old barista Samantha Koenig, murdered in Anchorage, Alaska. On February 1, 2012, Israel had abducted Samantha from her workplace, sexually assaulted her, and killed her the following day. He then hid her body in a shed for nearly 2 weeks. The reason for the delay in disposing of the corpse? Israel went on a cruise in the Gulf of Mexico with his family, all while maintaining the facade of a normal life even as a brutal crime lay concealed. During the vacation, Israel closely followed the news coverage of Samantha's disappearance. Even from a distance, he tried to remain in control of the narrative. Upon returning to Alaska, his treatment of the body became even more disturbing. He applied makeup to her face in an attempt to make her look alive. He even sewed her eyelids open, creating the illusion that her eyes were still awake. He then staged a gruesome photograph, crafting a fake ransom image to trick Samantha's family into believing she was still alive. While orchestrating all of this, Israel continued to live a seemingly normal social life, interacting with family, caring for his daughter, and hiding in plain sight. The methodical coldness with which he manipulated Samantha's body revealed the full extent of his psychopathy. After producing the ransom image, he sent it to the Koenig family, alongside a demand for $30,000. Later, he dismembered Samantha's body and disposed of the remains in Lake Matanuska, located north of Anchorage. In addition to Samantha's case, Israel is also a suspect in the disappearance of Jim Tedwell, an electrician who vanished in the town of Longview on February 15, 2012, just 2 weeks after the murder of the 18-year-old barista, Jim. Tedwell's case drew the attention of investigators for several reasons. He led a stable life, was married, the father of adult children, and had no known history of conflicts or criminal activity. His sudden disappearance only deepened the mystery and furthered the FBI's belief that Israel Keyes' web of violence extended much farther than he ever confessed. Jimmy Tedwell was reported missing shortly after leaving work. A short time later, his car was found approximately 5 kilometers from his family's home. Inside the vehicle were Jimmy's glasses. But there were no signs of a struggle, and no relevant clues that could assist the investigation. This case fit perfectly within Israel Keyes' confusing non-pattern of victim selection, isolated targets, low risk of resistance, and disappearances that left few or no traces behind. Given the circumstances, local authorities launched a full-scale task force to locate Jimmy Tedwell, deploying search dogs and advanced tracking resources. Yet no trace of the electrician was ever found. Investigators believe that Israel Keyes was passing through the area at the time and had used a visit to family in Texas as a cover for yet another meticulously planned crime. On February 16th, just 1 day after Jimmy's disappearance, a bank was robbed in the town of Ozell, Texas. The assailant was described by witnesses as physically resembling Israel Keyes, particularly due to the distinctive white helmet worn. During the robbery, a model nearly identical to one Keyes owned, according to FBI reports. Israel Keyes was responsible for between 20 to 30 home invasions and multiple bank robberies committed between 2001 and 2012. Federal agents believe that the actual number of victims could be even higher. Ongoing investigations suggest Keyes was involved in up to 11 murders, and there is evidence indicating that he may have killed individuals outside the U.S. during his international travels. Israel Keyes was classified as an organized serial killer, one who systematically avoided detection. He frequently chose to kill outside his home territory, operating in distant locations and never repeating a geographic area. This strategy made it extremely difficult for law enforcement to connect his crimes. At the time, the FBI expressed particular interest in Keyes' operational methods, as they defied the usual patterns seen in most violent homicides. For example, in the alleged murders of Bill and Lorraine Carrier, Israel flew to Chicago, rented a vehicle, and drove nearly 1,600 kilometers to their home in Vermont, where he used a kill kit he had buried in the area 2 years earlier. Level of planning and emotional detachment revealed one of the most terrifying aspects of an organized killer: the ability to act with intelligence, patience, and total control over every detail. During one FBI interrogation, Israel stated that no one in his life, not even family or friends, truly knew who he was. According to him, no one had ever understood his real identity. In 2011, Jezreel revealed to authorities that he had nearly committed a triple homicide. The plan involved the murder of a young couple and a police officer in Anchorage on a remote beach. Hidden nearby with a silenced firearm, Keyes observed their movements, waiting for the perfect moment. However, just as he prepared to act, a second officer arrived, disrupting the plan. That day, his actual goal had been to test the silencer, which he intended to use in the later attack on the couriers. In a tone of mockery, Israel laughed during his confession, stating that the situation could have ended tragically. Fortunately, police reinforcements arrived in time, preventing the assault from unfolding. Israel remarked that he had come dangerously close to an incident that would have caused a lot of problems. Since youth, Keyes had demonstrated a deep fascination with other serial killers, but this wasn't mere curiosity. He studied them, obsessively, analyzing patterns, weaknesses, and strategies. As previously mentioned, his greatest influence was Ted Bundy, whom Israel believed he shared important traits with. However, Keyes feared being labeled a copycat. To avoid that, he went out of his way to create his own signature style, making sure his crimes were distinct and nearly impossible to compare. During one of his many FBI interviews, Israel Keyes made a chilling statement. He considered Dennis Rader, the infamous BTK killer, a coward all because Rader had publicly apologized for his crimes during his trial. When asked about Robert Hansen, Israel confidently claimed he knew everything about the case of the so-called Butcher Baker of Anchorage. In fact, Keyes declared that he probably knew every serial killer ever written about. Revealing that studying murder cases had become a personal hobby, he also expressed a particular interest in the crimes committed by James Holmes, the man behind the 2012 mass shooting in Aurora, Colorado. Israel Keyes was, by all definitions, genuinely lethal, a trait that made him not only meticulously dangerous, but also alarmingly sophisticated for the period in which he operated. It was on the morning of March 13, 2012, that Texas Highway Patrol Officer Ryan Henry and Texas Ranger Stephen Rayburn arrested Israel in the parking lot of the Cotton Patch Cafe in Lufkin, Texas. The arrest came after agents noticed that the vehicle Israel was driving matched surveillance footage taken from ATMs where Samantha Koenig's bank card had been used. Also assisting in the operation was Trooper Chris Nash of the Lufkin Police Department, who had previously seen the same vehicle circling the area. During a search of the car, officers found ink-stained cash, believed to be from a recent bank robbery, along with Samantha Koenig's credit card and cell phone. As Officers Stephen Rain and Brian Ginway continued the search, they uncovered a disturbing collection of items. Among them were maps with specific markings across California, Arizona, and New Mexico, bundled cash made up of small denominations, like $5 and $10 bills, and in the trunk, a green backpack, headlamp, a ski mask, a laptop, shooting goggles, and a firearm. They also found a collection of pornographic DVDs, including explicit transgender-themed content. A Samsung phone was located with its battery and SIM card removed. A plane ticket from Alaska Airlines revealed that Israel and his daughter had departed Anchorage in early March, a stop in Seattle and a final destination in Las Vegas shortly. After his arrest, Israel was transferred back to Alaska, where he officially confessed to the murder of Samantha Koenig. On April 2, 2012, a team of divers was deployed to Lake Matonaska to recover her remains. The body was successfully retrieved during the operation. Israel's trial was initially scheduled for March 2013, but before it could begin, he provided the FBI and Anchorage police with a series of confessions detailing other crimes he had committed throughout his life. On May 23, 2012, during a routine court appearance, Keyes attempted to escape. The moment echoed Ted Bundy's infamous courtroom escape. Though Israel was far less successful, he was quickly subdued by officers. Using a taser before he could get far, before ever standing trial, Israel Keyes stated he wanted to be executed. Within a year, showing no desire to delay the inevitable. As the trial date neared on October 23, 2012, FBI agents and local investigators conducted a search of Israel's home in the Turnagain neighborhood of Anchorage. At the time, both the FBI spokesperson and federal prosecutor declined to reveal what was found in the residence. To this day, no official information about the contents of that search has been released. While external investigations continued, Israel remained incarcerated at the Anchorage Correctional Complex, where he began displaying clear signs of growing agitation. According to Special Agent Joel Golden, his behavior during later interrogations became increasingly unstable, and he appeared visibly dissatisfied with the way his case was being handled. Prison guards noted that Israel had become more reclusive, engaging less with staff and appearing more withdrawn. Despite his deteriorating behavior, no one suspected he would be able to smuggle a deadly object into a constantly monitored cell. It remains unclear how Keyes obtained a razor blade, given the prison's strict policy allowing only supervised use of electric razors. Nevertheless, on the morning of December 2, 2012, Israel Keyes was found dead inside his cell. According to the official coroner's report, he had used the blade to cut his own wrists, bringing his terrifying reign to an end, in his own terms. There were also signs of attempted hanging, but according to the official autopsy report, the wrist slashes caused by the razor blade were sufficient to end Israel Keyes' life. It wasn't until 2020 that the FBI publicly released a series of drawings created by Israel while he was incarcerated. These illustrations were discovered on cell walls and on pieces of toilet paper scattered throughout his cell. Among the disturbing images were a pentagram, 11 skulls, and a chilling phrase written in capital letters, "We are one." Keyes also left behind a handwritten note, though the letter made no direct reference to the crimes he had committed. After forensic analysis, the FBI concluded that the 11 skulls represented a symbolic confession, a veiled admission of the total number of victims he had murdered over the years. According to investigators, the symbolism in the drawings suggested not only a silent confession, but also a morbid display of pride. Each skull had been carefully sketched, accompanied by phrases that showed no trace of remorse. On the contrary, the content reinforced a sense of belonging and a profound affirmation of identity. The phrase "we are one" was interpreted by some FBI analysts as a coded message to other killers, a statement of allegiance to a hidden community of predators. For these experts, the phrase functioned like a signal of loyalty, a final gesture of unity among those who kill without conscience due to Keyes' suicide. All formal charges against him were dropped, but the investigation into his crimes remains open to this day. Assistant U.S. Attorney Kevin Fields stated that the criminal case would remain open indefinitely, even in the absence of a trial, because there were and still aren't numerous unanswered questions. The charges that had been prepared for trial included the murder of Samantha Koenig and the double homicide of Bill and Lorraine Carrier. Yet, one particular detail caught the attention of investigators. Israel broke his own primary rule in the Koenig case. Samantha was abducted in a public, well-lit location, equipped with visible security cameras, a setting that completely contradicted the carefully calculated approach Keyes had applied in most of his other crimes. Typically, Israel displayed absolute self-control. However, in Samantha's case, his behavior became more impulsive. To authorities, the most plausible explanation was that Israel wanted recognition. By exposing himself so openly, he may have been seeking credit, a form of acknowledgement for what he had done. Despite denying any sense of vanity during his interrogations, Israel increasingly revealed himself to be a man who lived solely to kill, perhaps. In the final stretch of his life, he felt the need for someone to truly grasp the scale of his crimes. Even so, throughout his interviews with federal agents, Keyes only gave precise details for the murders that investigators had already linked to him through hard evidence. In other cases, he claimed he couldn't remember. or adopted a deliberately vague narrative, making it difficult for the FBI to advance their investigations. According to Special Agent Joel and Golden, had Israel Keyes not maintained emotional ties, things could have been even worse. With those closest to him, it was clear that Israel Keyes likely wanted his story to be made public. According to Special Agent Joel and Golden, Israel expressed a clear desire for the world to know about the crimes he had committed over the years. However, his primary concern was the emotional impact that such revelations might have on the few people he still cared about, particularly his family. In the final months before his death, Israel had devised a new escape plan. His intention was to flee Alaska and work as a contractor in areas of the U.S. affected by hurricanes. This strategy would allow him to travel across state lines without drawing attention, creating even more secure opportunities to commit murders without suspicion. During a press conference, Detective Monique Dahl of the Anchorage Homicide Unit delivered a direct and sobering statement to close the case. According to the detective, Israel Keyes did not abduct and kill people out of madness, nor because he believed he was receiving orders from a deity or due to a traumatic childhood. In her view, Israel killed simply because he enjoyed it the way an addict experiences intense gratification from a drug. It was, to him, pure pleasure.